Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Melissa Siegel. I'm a professor of migration studies, and this is a channel about all things migration. And today we're going to continue with our migration snapshot series where we look at one specific country using the Knowledge Center on Migration and Demography's Atlas of Migration. So today we're going to look at Denmark. Let's jump right in and start to look at Denmark. We'll start by looking at the population of emigrants and immigrants. We'll then look at residence permits and visas issued in the country. We'll also talk about asylum applications, and we'll even look at one measure of irregular migration in the country. We'll talk about citizenship and naturalization, as well as some indicators of social inclusion, and round it out by talking about education and employment. Now let's jump right in and look at the population in Denmark. So in 2020, the population of Denmark was close to 6 million people. And of those 6 million people, 5.6% were immigrants from outside of the European Union and 3.6% were immigrants from within the European Union. That means that around 9 to 10% of the Danish population is made up of immigrants. Now let's turn from stocks to flows, and we'll look at the annual flows of immigrants and emigrants in 2018. Now, if you're interested to learn more about the difference between migrant stocks and migrant flows and what that means, you can check out my video here. I'll also link it in the description below. Now let's look first at immigration. So what does immigration mean? It has to do with people coming into a country, and in this case we're looking at people coming into Denmark. So in 2018, 66% of the people that immigrated to Denmark were from within the EU, and only 34% were from outside of the EU. Now, if we look at emigrants, or the people that left Denmark in this period to go reside somewhere else, 40% went to reside within the EU and 60% moved outside of the EU. Now let's look at residence permit, and this is first residence permit issued in this specific year. So we're looking here between 2016 and 2019. We can see that around a quarter to a third of residence permits were issued for work reasons. A similar percentage were then also issued for family reasons. So this is for family reunification or family formation. Quite a number were actually issued for educational purposes, between 25% and 36%. And then we have the other category, and those could be reasons like asylum status or gaining refugee status. Now, actually, let's turn and look at first-time asylum applications. And between 2016 and 2019, you can see that more applications were put in earlier, so in 2016, than in 2019. And in general, more men put in applications than women. If we then look at the decisions made on those applications, first instance decisions in 2016 were much more mixed, with more people receiving refugee status or some kind of humanitarian or subsidiary protection. Then later, between 2017 and 2019, we see more and more actual rejections, with fewer in that period also receiving refugee status or some kind of other protection. Now let's look at one indicator of irregular migration. And we can look at irregular migration in this situation by looking at the number of people that were ordered to leave Denmark in this given year and the people that actually left or actually returned. And what you can see here is that between 28% and 37% of people between 2016 and 2019 actually left when they were told they no longer had the right to stay. So the number that we have left over are people that are generally going to end up in some kind of irregular situation. Now let's look at naturalization and citizenship. And what does naturalization mean? It means people who have actually gained citizenship, in this case in Denmark. So people coming from another country who have been able to gain citizenship. Now what we see also here is that the number of people who gained we can see the number of people who gained citizenship between 2015 and 2018, as well as how this is split between EU and non-EU nationals. Now, what is very clear is that non-EU nationals have a higher rate of gaining citizenship than EU nationals. And this is really just having to do with the take-up rate. So it's more advantageous for people coming from outside of the EU to gain citizenship than those from within the EU, because EU citizens in general have very similar rights to Danish citizens in this context. So gaining citizenship is not as helpful for this group. Now let's turn to some indicators of social inclusion. And the first one I want to look at is the income received by different groups. What you can see here is that nationals have higher levels of income than immigrants, and it is staggered. So immigrants from the EU actually have higher levels of income than immigrants coming from outside of the EU. But these numbers aren't as largely different in Denmark as they are in some other countries. Again, if you're interested in some of these comparisons, you can check out some of my other videos and other snapshots on other countries. We can also look at overcrowding rates and risks of poverty and social exclusion. If we look at risks of overcrowding or overcrowding rates, and that has to do with the number of people living within a household, what we see is that there are much higher levels of overcrowding among immigrants compared to natives, and that there are higher levels of overcrowding among EU immigrants, which is interesting compared to some of the other countries that we've seen in this series. We generally see in other countries a higher rate of overcrowding among immigrants from outside of the EU, but that is not the case in Denmark. If we look, though, at the risks of poverty and social exclusion among both adults and children, we do see higher risks of poverty for immigrants, and particularly immigrants coming from outside of the European Union. Now let's take a look at education levels of these different groups. And what you can see here is that nationals have both high rates of education and middle levels of education. What's different with EU nationals is that EU nationals are disproportionately represented in the higher levels of education category and have very few people who are in that low level of education. If we look at immigrants coming from outside of the European Union, here we see it more mixed, about a third in each category, but there is a higher representation of immigrants in that low education category. Now let's turn and look at some labor market indicators. And here we generally look at indicators of employment, unemployment, and long-term employment. But let's just stick to employment and unemployment for right now. And what we see is that there are not very big differences with regard to the employment rates, particularly among men. But among women, we do see higher employment rates of nationals compared to immigrants. And if we look at unemployment rates, again, the numbers are not so different, but in general, we do see lower unemployment rates among the nationals. Now let's look at this by levels of education. So we can look at low, medium, and high levels of education and how each of these groups are performing on the labor market. And we can see at the high education levels, really pretty much everyone is performing quite well, although we do see a general lower representation of female immigrants compared to national women. If we look at the medium educated group here, again, nationals and European immigrants look very similar, where immigrants coming from outside of the EU have lower rates of employment. And if we look at the low education level, here the groups look more similar, but actually the group that's performing the best here is immigrants coming from within the EU. Now, this was just a very quick snapshot of what's going on in Denmark today. If you are interested again in other snapshots, please do check those out. If you like this video, do give it a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and make sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the videos that I upload on different migration issues every week. I do hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.